Hello, everyone. My name is Angie Grove. I'm the Executive Director here at the Ethan Allen Homestead Museum, and I'd like to welcome you to our monthly lecture series. This series has been going on for over 20 years, and we have 11 lectures every year. They're all free to the public, and we have a rotating schedule of guest speakers. And I'm not going to say too much about today's speaker because that is going to be Maida's job, but my job is to let you know of our upcoming speakers and other upcoming events here at the museum. So next month on April 27th, we're going to have Kevin Graffinino, who's going to be talking about his new book on Vermont's Ira Allen, A Hard Founding Father to Love. So obviously very close connection to this site here, as Ira was Ethan's brother. Then we're going to have another lecture in May on the anti-Masonic period in Vermont history by Rob Grandchamp. And if you've come to any of Rob's presentations before, he's given a couple presentations. He is a great orator. He has no slideshow. He just stands up here and talks very animated. So I really encourage you. Very interesting to listen to. And in June, we're going to be welcoming back Skye McCarris, who in the past has presented on clothing from the 18th century and did like the whole dress up in front of the audience. This time she's going to be talking about 18th century military health and hygiene. We have a bunch of other speakers coming up as well, but those are the ones most that'll be coming up most quickly. You can take a look at our website to see our full list of speakers for the year. And if you have an idea for a speaker for our program, please let me know. Okay, really quickly, the Ethan Allen Homestead Museum is a 501c3 nonprofit. We do primarily run based off of donations as well as admissions to some of our paid programming events. So if you have the means and you're interested, there is a donation basket out by the front desk and also a tiny little miniature of the historic Allen House that one of our amazing volunteers, Bob over there, he rebuilt it after it was smashed last October during the break-in that happened here. So Bob just rebuilt it. It's back in there serving as a donation box again. So if you're able to give, we really appreciate it. It's your donations that help us bring programs like this one to life, as well as our reenactment events, our school field trips, etc. Okay. So without further ado, I am going to introduce to you one of our board members, one of our newest board members, Maida Townsend, who is going to be introducing our speaker. So please help me welcome Maida.
And should I be putting this down closer to my mouth?
If you want to.
Since I'm shorter? Oh, okay. And so that everyone understands, the microphone does not amplify. It's for the pickup for the CCTV. Okay. So it is my pleasure to welcome you to the first back here in person lecture of our lecture series, because during the winter months we were doing the lecture series via Zoom. Much nicer to be here back in the tavern. And it's my pleasure today to introduce to you Robert Mello. He's going to talk with us about the purchase which occurred back in 1859 by UVM of the tippy top, the summit of Mount Mansfield. Now, a little bit about Mr. Mello. He is a former trustee of the Ethan Allen Homestead Museum and also of the Vermont Historical Society. And additionally, he is a retired superior judge. He has had a lifelong fascination with history and the law, and he's an avid hiker, which I would imagine comes in handy going to the summit of Mount Mansfield. Yes. He has authored 2 books to date. One is The Last Stand of the Red Spruce, and the other, Moses Robinson and the Founding of Vermont. Mr. Mello's currently working on another book, The History of Forestry here in Vermont. Would you please give him a very warm welcome, Robert Mello.
Thank you very much, Maida. And what a joy it is to be back here at the homestead, especially on an early spring day like this. It was 66 degrees driving in. Pretty amazing after a true old-fashioned Vermont winter. So I'm going to talk today about UVM's purchase of the summit of Mount Mansfield. How many people already knew that the UVM owns the summit? Several of you. And how many of you have been on the summit? So we have a very knowledgeable audience, just as I would expect of any gathering here at the Homestead. So let me start by saying a few things about the summit. It's a special place. At 4,393 feet in elevation, Mansfield is our tallest mountain. The summit consists of a 2-mile-long ridge, narrow ridge extending from the forehead in the south to the chin in the north, with the nose in between the face of Mount Mansfield. Because the summit is almost entirely above tree level, the views for the summit are spectacular in every direction. And except for some hiking trails and a few telecommunication towers and associated buildings, the summit remains largely undisturbed by human development. What makes the summit of Mount Mansfield most unique, however, is that it is home to a 250-acre meadow of rare and uncommon plants, usually found only in the Arctic and on a few other high elevation peaks in northern New York, northern New England, and eastern Canada. Plants like Bigelow's sedge, Highland rush, Greenland sandwort, alpine bilberry, and black crowberry. The meadow is a tiny remnant of the Arctic vegetation that covered the northeastern United States some 10,000 years ago as the last of the Ice Age glaciers retreated. These tundra plants in turn support a small number of rare insects, such as the boreal long-lipped tiger beetle and the yellow-banded bumblebee. Just one other peak in Vermont, Camel's Hump, which has a 10-acre meadow, supports such a community of rare plants. Few plants and insects can survive the harsh conditions found above tree line in our northern mountain region. Because these plants are so small and fragile, they are quite vulnerable to damage by foot traffic and development. Therefore, they need to be protected. Part of the reason why the tundra has done so well on Mount Mansfield is because the University of Vermont in 1859 decided to purchase the summit and assume responsibility for preserving it in its natural state. In 1859, two men owned the summit of Mount Mansfield, William H. Bingham of Stowe and John B. Wheeler of Burlington. Bingham also owned the Summit House, a small hotel for tourists located about 300 feet below the summit in the vicinity of the nose. And we have a picture of the Summit House here. There it is. And you can see the nose above it. That picture was taken probably in the early 1900s, but it dates way back to 1859 and earlier. On September 30, 1859, Wheeler and Bingham signed deeds conveying the 400-acre summit to the university. The deeds were remarkable. Bingham's deed said, quote, "It is a condition of this grant that no timber growing or undergrowth on said tract shall be cut down, set on fire, or used on the above land conveyed, except such as may be necessary for the erection of buildings for scientific purposes," unquote. Wheeler's deed specified that, quote, "the summit of said mountain shall at all times be free for the access of visitors," and it stated that the summit could only be used, quote, "for the purpose of an observatory or for scientific purposes," unquote. UVM President Calvin Pease accepted the deeds on behalf of the university. According to the deeds, Wheeler and Bingham each received $1,000 from the university for the land. The parties' intent was clear. The summit was to be preserved in its wilderness state, except for the construction of buildings needed by the university for scientific or observatory purposes. No timber, trees, or undergrowth could be cut down, burned, or used for any other purpose. In addition, the summit had to remain available to visitors, including Bingham's hotel guests and other members of the public. This was certainly a good deal for Bingham and his business partners. They received $2,000 for the land and the assurance that no competing hotel would ever be built on the summit. They also received assurance that the summit would remain in its natural condition for the continued enjoyment of their summit hotel guests. But why did the university, an educational institution, agree to such an arrangement? $2,000 was a substantial amount of money in 1859, especially for land on the summit of a mountain that could not be developed or used except for very limited purposes. Indeed, half that amount, just $1,000, could buy you a house and lot in Burlington back then. So $2,000 was a lot of money. Moreover, the university was experiencing significant financial problems at the time because of a financial panic that had occurred in 1857. At the time it purchased the summit, the university owed its faculty and staff over $6,000 in unpaid salaries. So in light of these circumstances, the decision to purchase the summit then was quite surprising. The decision also appears to be unprecedented. Never before had an American educational institution or governmental entity purchased or set aside wild land for the purpose of preserving it in its natural state forever. The federal government did not grant Yosemite to the state of California until 1864, 5 years later. The first national park, Yellowstone, was not created until 1872. The Adirondacks of New York were not declared forever wild until the 1880s, and the White Mountains of New Hampshire did not become a national forest until 1918. So the individuals at the University of Vermont who spearheaded this acquisition of the summit were ahead of their time. While the deeds clearly establish what the parties intended to happen on September 30, 1859, they do not explain why the university would agree to pay $2,000 to purchase a mountaintop, or why the university would promise to preserve the summit and its vegetation in their natural state for posterity. Yet the deeds appear to be the only documents that the parties created to document their transaction. No public announcement or press release was issued by the university, and the records of the Board of Trustees of the university make no mention of the purchase. They don't even mention that it was under consideration. There are also no documents identifying the individuals at the university who participated in approving of this acquisition, other than President Calvin Pease, who we know attended the closing and accepted the deeds on behalf of the university. There is one other individual, however, who was probably influential in reaching the decision, namely George Perkins Marsh, who was a member of the UVM's Board of Trustees and who is considered by many today as the father of the modern environmental movement for his groundbreaking book, Man and Nature. We have a picture of the big fella here. There he is, George Perkins Marsh. In his book, Man and Nature, Marsh showed that the ancient civilizations of the Mediterranean had brought about their own collapse by deforesting their hillsides, eroding their soils, pursuing their fish and game to the point of extinction, and abusing their natural resources. He warned that, quote, "The earth is fast becoming an unfit home for the noblest inhabitant, and another era of equal human crime and human improvidence would threaten perhaps even the extinction of the species," unquote. As a remedy, Marsh proposed a remedy for what we should do, and this is one of my favorite passages from his book. As a remedy, Marsh suggested that, quote, some large and easily accessible region of American soil should remain, as far as possible, in its primitive condition, at once a museum for the instruction of the student, a garden for the recreation of the lover of nature, and an asylum where indigenous trees and humble plant that loves the shade, and fish and fowl and four-legged beasts may dwell and perpetuate their kind. The university's decision to purchase and preserve the Mansfield summit was in complete accord with Marsh's prescription. Although Marsh would not publish his book until 1864, he had been developing and advocating these core concepts in Vermont since the 1840s and 1850s. So his views would have been well known by his colleagues at the university. The historical record suggests that Calvin Pease, the president of the university, had good reasons to recommend that the university acquire the summit on the terms that it did. At the time of the purchase, a team of geologists was wrapping up an exhaustive 2-year-long geographical, botanical, and zoological investigation of Vermont, including Mount Mansfield. In their final report, the geologists noted the wild and romantic beauty of the mountain, and they described some of the interesting geological features, including the physical evidence they found between the nose and the chin, proving that the summit had been scraped by glaciers in the ancient past and in the last ice age, and had once been at the bottom of an ancient sea. The geologists also discussed the unusual plants growing on the summit, noting that they were, quote, essentially different, unquote, from any other vegetation in the valley below. The authors concluded, quote, to the contemplative mind, this is a spot of unusual interest and well calculated to inspire one with reverence. To the student who reads the book of nature, there is revealed a page of instruction on this mountain. To a contemplative mind like that of President Calvin Pease, the summit of Mount Mansfield clearly would have been a spot of considerable interest, scientific interest to the university and its students because of the mountain's geological importance and its unusual community of summit plants. Pease would also have agreed with the geologist's conclusion that Mansfield's wild and romantic beauty were a source of emotional and spiritual inspiration for the, quote, student who reads the book of nature, unquote. Pease was both an ordained minister and of the Congregational Church and a student of the classics. He loved the Romantic poets, including Wordsworth. Born in Canaan, Connecticut in 1813, Pease moved with his family to Charlotte, Vermont, when he was 13 years old. There, according to his friends, he experienced, quote, the scenery and bracing winds of Vermont, and, quote, felt the inspiration of nature in her forms of sublimity and beauty, unquote. Upon moving to Burlington, he fell in love with Mount Mansfield and its stunning views of Lake Champlain and the Adirondacks. According to a colleague, Pease had, quote, a poet's enthusiasm for nature. His love for lake and mountain scenery never forsook him and was often the glowing theme of his conversation and letters, unquote. Pease was not alone in his romantic appreciation for Mount Mansfield. By the way, we have a picture of President Pease, too. There he is. Dapper fellow. So he was not alone in his romantic appreciation of Mount Mansfield. In Vermont, in the late 1850s, the romantic landscape painting style of the Hudson River School was ascendant. And in Burlington, at the time, the most popular disciple of that style was Charles Lewis Heide. According to art historians, quote, Heide's many images of Lake Champlain, like those of Mount Mansfield, reflect a set of attitudes regarding the power of uncultivated nature to teach, quote, lessons of high and holy meaning, unquote. One of Heide's finest paintings was of Mount Mansfield, which he painted in Underhill around 1857, and in which he captured the mountain's, quote, wild, uncontaminated state of primeval nature. And we've got that painting here as well, just gorgeous. And you can sense the wild, uncontaminated state of primeval nature in that painting. From the University of Vermont, from the campus itself, Pease enjoyed an unimpeded view of Mount Mansfield as it rose dramatically to its full height out of the Pleasant Valley Plateau 25 miles away in Underhill. Pease would have recognized the power of Mount Mansfield to teach lessons of high and holy meaning, not only to Victorian painters, but also to his students at the university. Hence, Pease and his colleagues had good educational reasons to recommend that the university purchase the summit on the conditions set forth in the deeds. First, the summit contained important geological evidence, as well as a 250-acre community of unusual plants that would probably be of considerable interest to the university's natural history students and professors. Second, Mount Mansfield's wild beauty and surpassing panoramic views had the power to inspire reverence in his students and to teach students lessons of high and holy meaning. The purchase also satisfied George Perkins Marsh's ecological concern that natural resources be conserved as a museum for the instruction of the student, a garden for the recreation of the lover of nature, and an asylum where indigenous plants and animals may dwell and perpetuate their kind. Motivated by a love of nature, therefore, and a recognition of Mansfield's beauty and scientific interest, the university, through its leaders, decided to purchase and preserve for us a natural resource of great local importance, something no one in this country had ever done before. Thanks to their decision, the Mansfield Summit is still wild, and its tiny remnant of Ice Age tundra still thrives. In addition, thanks to the precedent that they set 166 years ago, hundreds of thousands of acres of scenic and ecologically important forest lands in Vermont are now under the protection of governmental agencies and nature conservancy trusts. Today, Mount Mansfield is the most frequently visited mountain in Vermont, with over 40,000 visitors a year, and its summit ridge has been declared a state natural area and a national natural landmark. Throughout this country, there are countless natural resources too small for the federal government's notice, but of great importance to the people, plants, and animals living there. Calvin Pease and his colleagues have shown us that thoughtful people with foresight and fortitude can take matters into their own hands, and with the help of stable local institutions, preserve for posterity the precious natural resources in our own backyard. Thank you very much. We have time for questions? Yeah, any? Happy to take questions. Yeah.
I just moved to Vermont recently, so can you show me on that picture what we're looking at, and if the meadow can be seen on that painting, or the general area?
So so this is the forehead.
Okay.
In the south end. That's the chin. There are many peaks on Mount Mansfield. The nose is in between. And there are three minor peaks, at least three minor peaks. The upper lip, the lower lip, and you can't see it, but there's an Adam's apple down there. And this is 2 miles long, so if you hike from one to the other, you'll be hiking 2 miles.
And would the meadow be between the
It's
nose?
on the top. It's on the top. So
It's on the top.
the flat top.
Okay.
And the chin is the highest peak on Mansfield, and it's the highest peak in Vermont. It's in Underhill. And there's a marker. It's in Underhill. People in Weld County claimed it for a long time, but it's not theirs. The forehead and the nose are in Stowe, but not the chin.
Do we know what that road is that's running along there?
It's heading straight for Mansfield from the west, isn't it? So it's probably, I don't know, could it be old Route 2? You think it's Pleasant Valley Road? Still a dirt road now, probably. Yeah, no, it's a back road. It could be Pleasant Valley, although it seems a little, if the mountain is 25 miles away, that can't be Pleasant Valley Road, but I can't tell you which road it is. Yes, sir.
Because the land is in two different municipalities, and I can't remember the dates, but it used to be the town of Mansfield.
Yeah.
The town of Sterling was involved somewhere in there.
Yeah.
Where is the deeds or deed recorded in what town?
Well, I found the deeds that I quoted to you in Underhill.
In Underhill.
But they must also be recorded in Stowe, because the land is in both towns, and so the deeds would have to be recorded in both towns. So, in the beginning, there was the town of Mansfield. The mountain was named after the town. And so, there's a wonderful story that Kevin Graffinito will tell you when he comes to talk about his book on Ira Allen. So I won't steal his thunder. But basically, when it was discovered that the town of Mansfield consisted of a mountain and therefore nothing anybody could farm, he unloaded it to some unsuspected purchasers, and they discovered to their chagrin that they couldn't do much with this land. So it got divided between Underhill and Stowe, and I forget the year. Sterling may be an earlier name for Jeffersonville.
I think it's split between Jeffersonville and Johnson and Stowe. I think that was
Right, and that's the other side of the mountain. You can't see it from here. That would be Smuggler's Notch. So on the other side of the mountain, another gorgeous spot.
How many acres did you say?
The summit is 400 acres. That they purchased is 400 acres. 400, and 250 acres of it are these alpine plants. Yes, sir.
Was there bad feelings amongst staff, or was it not known, since they were owed $6,000? I'm just curious.
I don't know. I think if I had been a professor, I'd be pretty unhappy. That $2,000 could have helped pay some of what you owe me. Yeah, I don't know.
Perhaps that explains the lack of documentation.
It got burned.
Yeah, it was hushed up and it wasn't in, I guess, in any of the newspapers or anything like that.
Well, and it's not like newspapers didn't report on things like this. They did. There was a newspaper article shortly after this transaction took place. There was a newspaper article about Bingham's decision to enlarge the Summit House. It's going to double the size, and it's going to cost all this money to do, money that he got from this transaction, and it's going to have all these wonderful facilities for tourists. So there was a story about that shortly after the purchase, but nothing about the purchase, not even in the records of the trustees. Amazing.
How long did that hotel last up there? I probably have.
100 years.
Okay,
I believe it burned in 1860.
okay.
And
But not long after.
well, no, I should start again. The Summit House was owned by Bingham, but he also owned the big Grand Hotel in Stowe. In fact, he was a little hotel, and he greatly expanded it. He brought in investors from Boston and New York and Montreal, and they put in a ton of money, and he built this grand, huge hotel. And the purpose of the Summit House was to accommodate those people who were staying in his hotel in Stowe who wanted also to have a mountain experience. So at first, it was located about halfway up the mountain, on the Stowe side. And then he moved it to where it was in that photo a year later. And then he expanded it after this transaction. He was competing with business people in Underhill who were also trying to take advantage of this lucrative summit tourist trade. Tourism was big back then. And people were coming from all over the South and New England to come to Stowe and come to Vermont generally to have a experience with nature. And so the tourist industry was quite lucrative, and Bingham was competing with Underhill folks for that trade. And the folks in Underhill built a halfway house on the Underhill side, but he beat them to the punch in terms of getting a summit house up there. And then he prevented them from ever having one by selling to the university.
So the current Summit House, which side of Mount?
It's not there anymore.
Well, there's a
visitor center type of.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah,
there's a restaurant.
Oh, down.
Oh,
yeah.
That's not a.
well,
The Summit House is no longer there, though. Yeah,
well,
Yeah.
that's the name of the restaurant that's up there now.
I'm sure, yeah.
And we took a gondola up to it.
Yeah.
Yes, but it's not the summit.
Yeah,
So
So walk
that
over
is,
the top?
It's on the Stowe side too.
Yes.
Yeah.
The other,
that's
Yeah.
what I'm trying to do.
yeah,
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 The Cliff House.
the Cliff House,
Cliff House.
that's right.
yeah.
And I've walked over.
Catherine.
When the road was proposed along the Green Mountain, the ridge of the Green Mountains, would it have gone right over the top of Mount Mansfield?
The Green Mountain Highway, Green
Yeah.
Mountain Parkway, the Green Mountain Parkway.
I think
It would have,
mentioned before.
it would have gone over from Camel's Hump, I think, down to Abraham. I don't think they were planning to include Mansfield.
Oh,
Because it would have been coming like to Burlington, the population center type of thing, you know what I mean? If it was a highway from the south.
Thank goodness they didn't build it.
Yeah, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Is it folks from the UVM or others working for state forestry, or who maintains, who protects the sanctity of and the well-being of the plants and all up there?
So the university does that under a contract or agreement of some sort with the Green Mountain Club and the Department of Forest, Parks, and Recreation. So it's a three-way agreement, and they get grants to fund the agreement, and they hire young folks to spend the summer up there, making sure tourists and hikers stay off the plants and on the trail, and explain what these plants are and why they need to be protected during the hiking season.
And associated with my initial question, do you happen to know if that area is actively used by the Environmental Studies Department at UVM? They take students up?
Yes. In fact, in November, I gave a similar talk at the University of Vermont at their 50th anniversary symposium of the Natural Areas Program. So the University of Vermont not only owns the summit of Mount Mansfield, but many other precious natural areas throughout the state, including most recently a forest in Heinsberg, which they recently acquired. So all these areas, they include wetlands, forests, mountaintops, and almost every form of unique and endangered ecosystems that we have in the state. They own several of them. And through their Department of Natural Resources, they and their students study them, do reports on them, and help maintain them. It's a great program. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Do you know if there were ever efforts after 1859 by commercial interests to try to buy this property for their own purposes?
I'm not aware of any, but that doesn't mean that they didn't unofficially make inquiries about it. I'm not sure what they would do with it, though. I mean, what do you do with 400 acres at the top of a mountain that can't be used? I mean, the university could only sell what it has, and all it has is the ownership with a limited right to use it for only limited purposes, and the duty to preserve it in its natural state. So,
I'd like it for an Airbnb.
well, but they couldn't build it. They couldn't build anything on it. They can't develop it. And I think the language of the deeds is so tight that the university couldn't even sell it, even if they wanted to. Even if somebody is willing to pay a lot of money, the deeds make it clear that the university is to keep this forever. And it's only the university who could build anything, and only for the limited purpose of scientific observations.
So how did the commercial antennas, et cetera, get up there under those kind of parameters?
Well, they sneak by. Yeah.
What's the lawyer talking about?
The lawyers convinced the lawyer for the university, whoever that was back then, that this was a scientific purpose. Yeah, a very controversial decision, and I'm not so sure the same decision would be made today. But they're still there. Good question.
I hope I didn't miss this in your talk, but up until the summit, those parts of the mountains are owned by the towns around them. Did I get that right?
Well, back then they were. Now they're owned by the state. It's all part of the Mansfield State Forest, so which is, I don't know, tens of thousands of acres. The state has added more and more and more over time. So the state now owns almost everything on the Underhill side, and also the Stowe side. So the ski area rents the land from the state for the ski area, but the state owns it, and it owns all the way down into the Notch. Yeah, so they added several thousands of acres of the Notch and then bought the land in between. So it's our largest state forest.
I've been down to Waterbury in the reservoir there, and I thought that was part of the Green Mountain Forest too. I was surprised, but that area.
Part of it is owned by the state as well. Yeah, but that's not part of the Mans.
Okay.
Yeah.
I have not so much a question as an observation, but you were talking about how UVM is almost like a caretaker of that land, because while they own it, they have the responsibility to preserve it and to protect it, and it just reminded me of this site. For those of you who don't know, the museum sits on about 300-acre park that is also, it's not just historically preserved, it's environmentally preserved with the wetlands of the Winooski River, which has become more apparently important, its importance has become more apparent to us the last couple summers when we've had flooding and we've needed the wetlands to soak up that extra flood water. And so it just reminded it. I was just seeing a connection between your talk and UVM's role at the top of Mount Mansfield and like the Ethan Allen Homestead Museum's role in partnership with the Winooski Valley Park Districts to both protect this site for preservation of history and environmental purposes as well.
How did the museum do last July in the floods?
So, it's like the people in the 18th century knew where to build their houses next to rivers, right? So they built all these buildings. We're on a little bit of a hill right here. And so the hill became an island as the floodwaters came in. But all of the buildings were preserved. Unfortunately, some of our community partners who farm the floodplain, their farms were destroyed.
That Ethan Allen was a wise old owl.
Yeah. And of course, it's not like he came up with the idea on his own. The Abenaki people were farming here about 600 years before him, too. So, the Europeans came and they saw cornfields, so they said, that's fertile farmland. we want it.
Yes, sir.
I remember reading an interesting story about how the mountain got its chin, nose, and head from a tribe in Jeffersonville. Familiar?
I'm not familiar with that story.
Well, I'll tell you what I know in Cliff Notes version. There was a tribe, and I believe they were Abenaki, living in Jeffersonville, and they had a ceremony of the rising sun, and that was a real important thing for them, kind of spiritual. And the chief was getting older. His firstborn son did not have the use of his legs, and when the chief died, the son became the chief of the tribe. And many of the other men in the tribe didn't feel good about that, and so prompted this the chief's son. In the wee hours in the morning, he crawled up to the top of the mountain and made it, but it was so strenuous that he died on top of the mountains. And prior to that, the mountain was a big round mountain, no feature. And clouds formed, and for days, all this weather, and when it dissipated and the sun came out, it was his features on the mountaintop.
Great story. Wow, that's a great story. I had not heard that.
Yeah, I read it somewhere in a little historical pamphlet. I thought, that's a good story.
Yeah. Was it written by somebody named St. Francis?
I have no idea.
That's a great story.
We'll have our Abenaki cultural partners, Elmo Wyrie, will have to ask them
Absolutely.
if they've heard the story, if they can corroborate.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, I've never heard anybody say this before, but I've never said this publicly, but to my eyes, if you look at Camel's Hump from the east, so you're looking west, it's not Camel's Hump from Chittenden County, but Camel's Hump from Washington County. You're on the interstate, and you're heading toward Burlington, you're heading north, and you look at Camel's Hump from the east. I see a forehead, a nose, and the mouth of a Native American lying flat, facing upwards. And I've never seen anybody, no one's ever said that before, written that. I can't believe I'm the only person who's noticed that. But next time, remember your Abenaki story. Next time you're heading back to Burlington from Montpelier, and you get to that stretch where Camel's Hump is right up there, stay on the road and see if you don't see a face.
Will do.
Yeah. Well, thank you all very much.